Hello, welcome everyone to one of our initial sessions. This session is focused on XDR without limits, Open XDR. What a great way to start off the event. I really enjoyed listening to David Barton and Mr. Bigman during our keynote speech. My name is Jeremy Cullen, Channel Account Director here at Highwire Networks. Today I'm joined by Brian Stoner, VP of Service Providers at Stellar Cyber, as well as Mark Porter, our Chief Executive Officer here at Highwire Networks. Great to be here with both of you gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeremy. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Our goal is to make sure we provide valuable information to the audience. Please at any time ask questions during the presentation. This is for you. We will keep this at a high level, technically speaking, and address any questions as we go. So we'll start off with the first slide. Brian, got a question. Can you please give us a little background on Stellar Cyber and the evolution of Open XDR?
Yeah, Jeremy, for sure. The evolution of security over the last 5 years or so for us started with what we consider to be a big data problem. The SIMs and other technologies that were designed to meet compliance requirements just simply can't handle the volume of events that are coming from the different tools in customers' environments today. And leveraging rules-based detections is kind of an inefficient way to solve that problem. So our team set about trying to figure out a way to leverage machine learning and artificial intelligence to help kind of weed through, and in some respects, we call it burning the haystacks of alerts, so that you can get down to the needles of the things that you should really be concerned about. And so that's where our journey started. Over time, that has evolved. And today, we have more machine learning-based detections built into this Open XDR platform than any other provider. And it does a couple of different things. One is it reduces that mean time to detection. We can see things that are happening between different parts of your business that you may not be aware of. And once we do detect something, we've built in some great capabilities to respond very quickly and very accurately. So what started off as a journey to solve a big data problem kind of evolved into what we call Open XDR today, where we'll take signals from any device that your customer may have when you get introduced to them, and give them that unique value of that reduced mean time to detection and mean time to repair.
It's very important, especially solving that problem with so many different panes of glass. And Mark, please share with our audience our Overwatch team and why Stellar Cyber is the essential piece to our approach.
Sure. It's really important for us. The Open XDR concept really helped us solve for a challenge as we were architecting our managed security platform. The challenge that we have as a channel-only organization, only working with the great partners that we have, is that we have to take our partners as we find them and enable them to take their customers as we find them. And everybody says this, sort of tongue-in-cheek, but it's really true. Every customer is a little bit of a snowflake, right? There's no two networks that are exactly the same. And to treat every customer, every partner, every end user as similar and try to wedge them into a product or a platform that we built for our purposes would be to do them a disservice. So when we looked at what we were doing in the detection space and looked at the platforms that were out there, we really only found one platform that was all-encompassing and totally open and allowed us to completely avoid vendor lock and to be able to say yes to customers. And to be candid, that's a qualified yes. Yes, we can integrate what you have. The question is, can you, how useful is the information? And then we get into more discussions around of what benefit is that information, right? If we're duplicating information from one system to ours, that may not make a whole lot of sense. We want to use whatever information we can for context to plug gaps and to open up those blind spots in the network, right? So having an Open XDR platform and going with Stellar for us was critical to our ability to accept those customers and to be able to provide each end user, from very small to very large, with the type of detections that they need, and to be able to build custom parsers and build through APIs and any sort of connectors that we have, the types of feeds that we need. For us, then we were able to take that and make that sort of the sun around which all of our other pieces of the platform orbit. And that allows us to truly bring a single pane of glass for 5, 6, 7 different product sets that even at a minimum, they have to be able to provide us alerts where our analysts are looking in the console, so that we can then go off to whatever platform we need to do our research. But just from our perspective, the openness of the architecture and avoiding a vendor lock in that space was really critical, because now we're able to integrate all of our other pieces of the platform that support it into that open XDR architecture.
And that's very important, being vendor agnostic and being able to ingest information from any endpoint solution, the servers on-prem, and also the different cloud services. And Brian, correct me, but we can't ingest anything from AWS to Azure AD, as well as Google Cloud Platform too, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the key things that we've all learned during COVID, is that a lot of users now are not behind that traditional firewall. They're in their home offices. They're using different SaaS services. They're using different cloud services. You may not even have that closet in your office anymore that housed all of your, critical applications. That may live up in AWS or Azure or Google, right? The key thing and the key differentiator that really makes our platform more helpful for the high-wire analysts is that we go through this process that we call Interflow, where we normalize the signals that we're getting from all those different areas, right? And part of that process is pulling the metadata that's security specific out of CloudTrail, out of the Azure Hub, out of even Salesforce.com, for instance, right? Are the right people logging into that application, and is it coming from a compromised endpoint of ours, right? So the key thing is that as we're going through this Interflow process, we do a lot of the work that a SOC analyst has to do manually on events before we even store it in the data lake. So for instance, if we see a file that we've never seen before in Office 365, we have a sandbox that can analyze it and give it a reputation before we store it in the data lake. The reason that's important is that now when we present an event, it could have triggers from multiple different tools in that environment, but we correlate it into one event. And with the additional context of the threat intelligence that we've applied to it, now the analyst doesn't have to go search around and figure out, is this bad on VirusTotal or somewhere else? We'll give them that reputation with the event. And then, they'll have that knowledge to start to ascertain how big of a problem is this and what are the key steps that I need to take to remediate it quickly. So really, that's the goal, to help Highwire provide a much more targeted, high fidelity, accurate service.
Yep, and that Interflow is specific to the Starlight platform, and that allows us to really help become that early warning detection system and detect anomalous behaviors, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Mark, and what is your vision on how Overwatch will continue to build on the Open XDR technology?
Well, I think, again, back to my earlier statement, and the reality of the situation is the problem of cybersecurity and both the business and the technical issues. And I'm not a technologist. I focus more on the business aspects of it, and I think the entire problem is a business problem, to be honest. And technology enables us to solve for some of that. But when I look at the future, the scope of the problem and the challenges is only getting broader. And for us, the key was to be able to put in a platform that would allow us to, one, scale to support the partners as we're nearing almost 100 partners onboarded. I think by the end of third quarter, we'll likely have we'll exceed the 100 partner threshold. But as we continue to add those partners, we're continuing to add diversity to the ecosystem of what we have to support, and to constantly be in a situation where we have to bring in another tool or another widget or some other thing to support those partners, that would be untenable for us and rather uncomfortable for our partners as they look at how to best service their customers, right? So with the OpenXDR platform from Stellar, we're able to get continuous improvement in the platform because Stellar does an outstanding job of that, and let them focus on the platform itself because that's not our expertise. Our expertise is in delivering a managed service. So as Stellar spends their time, energy, and resources on upgrading the platform and going through their various dev cycles, we're able to spend our resources on understanding the customer needs, understanding the connectivity that we need to the various systems they're having, understanding how to respond to new threats as they emerge, understanding how to proactively identify things that we get the advantage of through our multi-tenancy. Because if one customer is seeing something, it gives us an opportunity before threat intel feeds are updated. And for anybody who was listening to Bob Bigman's segment before this, by the time the threat intel feeds are updated, it's way, way too late. And so you think you just detected something that's just happening, and maybe months behind, right? So we're able to see these things in real time. The sandbox is a great example. If we see a hash that's new on one customer, we're able to run a query against all of our customers immediately and determine if we're seeing that anywhere else. We noticed a couple of weeks ago, we had 6 customers who were under attack. We saw something happen with one customer. We started looking harder at it, and we had 6 customers who were all dealing with the same general attack vector, and we were able to prevent it. In that instance, prevent it on all of our customers' networks. It was a global attack happening against thousands and thousands of customers, but 6 of our paying customers were quickly made aware of what was going on and what to look for if there was any anomalous behavior. So for us, it's really critical to be able to have all of that in one package and not be in a situation where we're constantly having to add a tool just to solve, or this customer has X and that customer has Y.
Yeah, so it's a couple of key points there. The multi-tenancy aspect of the platform, but our team's ability to be able to automatically add new threat hunting capabilities to the platform and spread that searching across all the different tenants is what I got from that. Very, very powerful. Brian, anything you want to add on this slide that we're looking at right now?
Yeah, I think just in general, right, what Mark said is really, really important, right? We at Stellar give the Highwire team the opportunity to not only interact with the machine learning model so that it's not black box, but to your point, we can help you write threat hunting rules that can look for things that maybe don't have a detection yet. But the key thing is that there's a future proofing built into the platform, and that we can always add new detections. And we do this on a every release basis, right? And a lot of the automated threat hunting rules that Highwire has created have wound up becoming full-time machine learning models in the platform, right? So this has been kind of a 1 + 1 = 6 type of relationship. And I think that's a really key thing for your partners to understand, is that it is a partnership. It's not just you're using a product. We're partners, and we're delivering this service together and to provide that higher level result, to Mark's point.
Yeah. And also, again, just to really focus in on it, the vendor agnostic aspect of the platform being OpenXDR is key. Moving to the next slide, Brian, from a 30,000-foot level, could you explain how the platform uses AI and machine learning to lower the mean time to detection and mean time to response, and allows us at Overwatch to be the early warning detection system, so that way we can help our partners address the business problem that is cybercrime?
Sure. I'll talk about it at a high level, and then if anybody has any questions, we can double click on some of these concepts. But Artificial intelligence and machine learning can be broken down into a few different types, right? The first is supervised machine learning. Supervised machine learning is where you feed the machine learning models good files and bad files, good URLs, bad URLs, and you can train the machine learning to look at something net new and ascertain whether or not it has a good intention or a bad intention, right? That's unsupervised. That's supervised machine learning. The second type is unsupervised machine learning. This is the learning that the platform does on each individual customer's tenant, right? When you talked about multi-tenancy, Jeremy, what we want to do is we want to treat every customer as a unique entity, right? And so our unsupervised machine learning will baseline all the different behaviors in that customer's network. When do their users normally log on? When do they log off? What applications do they use? What are the normal traffic patterns, right? And so that unsupervised machine learning takes a couple of weeks to train on what's normal in that environment. But once you get through that training period, the alerts that come out of that are very, very high fidelity. The third type of machine learning that's going to be coming out I'll just give you the quick preview. Our next release is called graph machine learning. And what graph machine learning does is it takes the different events that are identified by the unsupervised machine learning and correlates those into incidents, right? The key concept here is that attackers don't just send you a ransomware phishing email, right? They don't just send you a URL to try to get your employees to click on it. What they're trying to do is establish a foothold in your network. Once they establish that foothold, they're going to deploy multiple techniques. And so by using the graph machine learning, we can actually connect those things into an incident that needs to be dealt with urgently in a more efficient way. So we're going to actually help your SOC team ascertain how bad an event is much more quickly, leveraging this graph machine learning in our next release. So we're really excited about that to come out next month, but there will be a lot more coming on that.
That's very important, especially when you talk about siloing off that information on a per tenant level and detecting those anomalous behaviors, whether it's from a user or from the network traffic. And that's also built into the reporting in the platform as well, right, Brian, as far as the per tenant, that's on a per tenant basis, so that way they can have some compliancy reporting built into?
Yeah, we have all of the major compliancies built into the platform, and not only can you leverage those reports and automate when they're generated, but you can also brand all of those things so that you're providing that service to your customer under your branding. So that's another important piece of that multi-tenancy, is that you can brand each tenant and you can brand the reports that it generates.
Awesome. And we did have a question come in. Mark, I'd like to ask this one to you real quick. Could you provide context as to what our partners look like to respect to business sizes?
Sure. Our partner business size is all over the board. And and when I say all over the board, I mean, we're talking from 1 and 2 man shops, 1 and 2 person shops, on up to multi-billion-dollar organizations who, resell to small, medium, and on up to extremely large businesses. I personally, and I believe the rest of the team reflects this, I'm personally very proud of the fact that we are able to accommodate small organizations as well as very large ones. And the reason is that I'm very passionate about this problem in small businesses. Small businesses are underserved when it comes to cybersecurity. There are inexpensive products and platforms out there. They just don't do the job. They don't do a great job. And a lot of small and mid-sized managed service providers don't have either the dedicated staffing to handle security, because handling security is a very, very complicated job in terms of it's resource intense. It's not a matter of shutting off an alarm or looking at something that's a very binary situation. This firewall is saying X, press this button, and or change this rule. It requires research. It requires time for every little alert. And as Brian stated, the AI and the ML can do a lot of heavy lifting before it's even presented to us, but we get a lot of alerts, and frankly, we believe there's no such thing as a false alert, and this is really important. There are only anomalies. The thing did happen. The question is it malicious or is it benign? And that takes resources to solve for. So we're also able to bring resources like Phil Burnett, our CISO, David Barton, our CTO, lifelong practitioners from the industry to bear with our customers. We help our customers and our partners and their customers in other ways when they have had incidents or they have customers who are trying to understand the information. And most of that, frankly, is because we're passionate about bringing these resources to small businesses. It's not something that's overly profitable business for us, but it is definitely something we do because it's part of our mission to provide this service to as many businesses as we can. So I believe there's nothing wrong with doing a little good in the world when you have the ability to do so. And so again, it's really all over the board from very, very large to very, very small. And we're happy to take our partners. Again, we take our partners as we find them. We've been doing that for 20 years, and it's no different in our Overwatch cybersecurity than it is in our high-wire technology installation businesses, which partners could be 1- and 2-person organizations on up to the largest resellers in the technology world.
Yeah, because a lot of times we're working with our partners to help fulfill the need of their end customer. So although it might be a 1- or 2-person shop, their end customers could be the size of 1 to 2 or even 1,000 users in that environment that we're helping work with to become the early warning detection system. I did have another question coming in. Brian, I'd like to ask you for this one. So sure. Does XDR replace EDR or MDR? And can we provide a use case where XDR does a better job than EDR or MDR? And I'm going to go back to an earlier slide that we were looking at that will kind of help walk through that.
Yeah, and this slide that you're going to share is kind of one that Gartner helped us with, right? But EDR, right, is a business that I was in at Silence, right? That's the focus on just the endpoint. We want to know what's happening on the endpoint and how can we early detect things and how can we stop them, right? So that's a very small aperture as far as your overall risk, right? MDR in the traditional sense typically included things like your firewalls and your email hygiene, things like that, which is great. And that's what I think most people would consider a traditional managed security services provider, as they kind of covered those areas. I think where Extended differentiates itself is that you have to really take into account everything in that customer's environment, right? It's their cloud applications, it's their cloud email, it's their Salesforce.com, it's their AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, right? So the reason that you need that extended aperture is because the attackers are leveraging it more and more, right? If you're just looking at your endpoints, you're missing 70% of the puzzle. If you're just looking at MDR, you're just looking at, even less, right? So it's how do you get that visibility, and then what do you do with it, right? What we do with it is we create detections. Every time the attackers change their tactics and behaviors, we can add new machine learning to detect it. So again, you need that broader scope, and you need that the different detections in that broader scope to connect all those things.
Yeah, great answer. Jeremy, I'd like to kind of chime in on this, and I'd like to talk about it from a business perspective for just a minute, because I think, again, nobody's going to confuse me for a technologist in this space, that's for sure. So I hope not, at least, because then I get stuck with hard questions. If you look at the business in the same image here that you have, when you look at the business this way, and it talks about visibility, and there's a term out there that's being bandied about called observability. I've shared with people that the biggest value that we get and clients get out of the XDR platform is insights on how the network's being used. If I, as the owner of a business with close to 300 employees in it, if I had this kind of insight and visibility into how employees functioned, how satisfied our customers were, how our customers are functioning, how money flows through the business, how work is actually being accomplished, how efficient is it, shut this off, turn that on. I'd be the happiest CEO on the planet if I had that level of visibility. Can't give that to people in their businesses with this tool set, but we can show them in ways they've never seen before how their network is being used and how things are traversing their network. And we talked about those signals, and you can give them a level of detail, not just through the standardized reports, but then as we start ticketing incidents, as we start looking at things that need to be dug into, those are opportunities for improvement. And again, for those who saw Bob Bigman, he was asked directly by David, how effective is pen testing and red teaming and all that stuff? And he said it's not very effective at all, because these organizations that he was helping with breaches had significant breaches, but they, the larger one had a tremendous offensive team out there doing all of those things. So when we look at this, the ability to learn day to day from, hey, we saw this traffic move from here to here. Is that okay? Is it expected traffic? Is it potentially malicious traffic? Customer looks at it, sees it. They might have a controls issue, right? They might. We had an incident where an employee moved a very large backup file to an unauthorized location. It wasn't malicious, but it was a violation of HIPAA. He moved it to a cloud storage space that wasn't part of their HIPAA scope. So when you see those things, those are the types of insights and observability that add tremendous value, because it's day-to-day learning and creating the opportunities for customers to then be proactive in how they harden systems, how they harden controls, how they enforce controls, and how you enforce the rules. So really, really critical stuff that comes out of XDR. And when you compare it to EDR and other pieces, EDR is a great tool that we can ingest the feed from that can help fill in some blind spots on machines that aren't behind the firewall, on machines where we get limited Windows rules from. It gives us an enriched view of what's going on that endpoint. And then when we build automations through the orchestrated and automated responses, we're able to do some phenomenal things to isolate issues to an endpoint, to trigger a response in that EDR, et cetera. So EDR is a critical piece of the puzzle, but XDR doesn't deem to replace most of this stuff. And again, this is why it's so important when we talk about the open part, because we can take our customers as we find them. And if they have a quality EDR that we know can provide us useful data, we'll work very hard to make sure that we can ingest that data in any way they can get it to us.
That's great feedback. And Brian, to piggyback off that, can you talk a little bit more about the automation response that we can do to the endpoints, the firewall, and to Active Directory as well?
Yeah, so in different attack scenarios, right, where maybe a user account is compromised or their machine is compromised, what we want to do is prevent you from having to log into a separate console to remediate that issue, right? If we serve that up as a correlated event where we know everything that led up to it and we saw everything that happened after it got compromised, the sooner we see that, the smaller the problem's going to be, right? So once we find it and we can say, okay, contain this host, right? Okay, we've got CrowdStrike at our disposal. Boom, contain the host, right? Or stop a process or quarantine a file that was maybe missed by the AV, right? So those are all things that we can do. If it's, a brute force attack from the outside and somebody's trying to hit your critical server, and we have an automated threat hunting rule that looks for that, as soon as we see it, we can just shut off that IP address at the firewall. And we don't even have to wait for an analyst to do it. If that's something that you're concerned about and you want to stop automatically, it's absolutely capable in the platform. And again, we're adding those new capabilities and new use cases all the time. So we made a very conscious decision not to, OEM or support only certain, EDR products. We connect with all of them, right? And we have response capabilities into all of them. So that's really critical. Again, it eliminates that vendor lock-in that you have with other platforms where they want you to have their whole stack to get that functionality.
Right, which is very tough for our partners to go into an environment, ask them to rip and replace everything. That open XDR vendor agnostic is very key to it. And Mark, just shed some light on that. When we work with our partners, and whether it's for them or with one of their end customers, and we're setting up the SOAR, we're doing that via playbook. We're not just automatically adding that without our partners' guidance and governance.
Yeah, I mean, in our story, Jeremy, everything's about the partners, right? So it's really, we call it a you plus us story. Being a partner-centric organization for over 20 years, it's critical. We want to provide them with best practices. We want to show them what's working for other partners, show them what's working to service end customers. But at the end of the day, we don't deem to know the relationship with their end users better than they do. That would be hubris on our part. So when we look at how to best service a customer, we want to build run books together. We do that early in the onboarding when we're onboarding individual customers, and we want to put together a program that's going to work for them and that end user. And as I said before, allowing for the fact that each end user network is a bit of a snowflake, we're actually able to accommodate different run books for different customers within a partner. And that's a critical piece of it. So as we look out, we want to work with them to make sure their processes and their best practices are adhered to, and that the service that their end customer is getting is something that would meet our partners' high standards.
Very key point there.
Yeah, maybe just to dovetail into that real quick, Jeremy. Another key capability of the platform is the role-based access, right? So each of your partners might have different relationships with their customers. Some may want to allow them access to make changes in the platform. Some may not. And so we've built in our multi-tenancy a very granular role-based access so that you can ensure that what you're providing in the platform is what you've outlined in your relationship with that customer. Because bigger customers might have more need to get into the platform and do things versus smaller customers. And so we give that flexibility to Highwire and the platform to deliver through your service.
Yeah, that's very key because we do not keep the platform behind closed doors. We allow our partners and our end customers to log into it if that makes sense for them. And Brian, I have a follow-up question for you from earlier on. We talked about having an early warning detection system. Can you talk about why that's so important and kind of maybe discuss industry dwell time, if you would?
The really critical thing is that the sooner you detect something anomalous happening, the sooner you can stop more anomalous things from happening, right? And the industry in general, when you think about SIM technology or signatures and things like that, it has to have happened already. And you have to write a rule to detect it, right? The reason you need this early warning system is it could be the difference between bankruptcy and staying in business for certain customers. If you get hit with a ransomware attack once, people are pretty understanding about that. You get hit with a ransomware attack twice, you're going to lose some of your bigger customers. You get hit a third time, you're done, right? And it's not me saying that. It's kind of backed up by what you would see if you were to do some research in the business. A lot of small businesses, if they're hit multiple times, it could be their business, right? So the early warning detection there is, in many cases, the difference between life and death for some of these small companies. So we take that extremely seriously, and that's why it's so important to connect the signals that we're getting from those different devices so that we can make sense of it and understand it early and understand what we can do to resolve it quickly.
That's very key. Go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say there's, again, referring back to Bob Digman's opening remarks, there's a real powerful thing in there that he talked about, and it's not about the early warning part. It's about the last piece of it, about having the system in place. When cyber criminals are looking at your network, they're looking for the quick score. They're looking for the path of least resistance. And it's simply a numbers game, right? There's a lot of businesses out there. If you don't want to be a victim, to some degree or another, I'll use it like an analogy. He talked about how they look and see, do you have an XDR system in place? Because that means that you've basically laid tripwires all over the organization. You're likely going to have it connected to all those various systems. It's very similar in some ways, having it in place, making it, it's going to be visible. We haven't even talked about the deception sensors and things like that out there that we can leverage in this. But it's very similar to the home alarm system. When you're walking up to the house and you're going to burglarize the house, if you see that one has an alarm sign in its yard and the other doesn't, which one are you going to choose, all other things being equal? I'm going to go after the one that's not going to sound a horn when I go, breaking through the window. Mm-hmm. If it's easy to do, they're going to do it. If it's more complicated and they realize that there's a better chance of them getting caught or logs being detected that would lead back to them, point back to them, they're more likely to just move along.
Yeah, very important piece there. And, I like to talk with our partners. It's nice to be able to spot that fire as soon as it starts, not later in the stages. Because if you start thinking about cyber attacks, the average dwell time, which is the time a bad actor breaks into a network to when they either launch their attack or get exploited, in 2019 was 194 days. I know Mr. Bigman talked about that one scenario where it was only 2 weeks prior to they launched their attack, but any amount of time in the network is not good. And having that stage one reconnaissance detection, anomalous behavior, and network traffic anomalous behavior detection is very important to the platform.
It was only 2 weeks because that's all it took for them to find what they needed to get to the place where they were ready to launch, right?
Right.
That's the reality of it. There's no sense in waiting any longer once they found what they wanted to hold hostage, right?
Yep, and I guess another thing I like to bring up is why it's so important for our partners, especially the managed service providers, to make sure that they're protected as well, is because over the past couple of years, we've seen a lot of them being used as a one-to-many attack vector. And I'll throw that out there to either one of you gentlemen that want to chime in on that.
I'd like to talk to that, and not just in the managed service. Because again, this was another topic that Bob talked about, and something that David Barton's talked about at length. Phil Burnett, our CISO, talks about at length. The one-to-many targets are critical, and cyber criminals have different motivations, right? We've talked a lot about ransomware and things like that, and that's largely the purview of Russia and the Eastern European ransomware gangs that are launching those types of things. But some of the other nation-state sponsored attackers aren't interested in ransomware and money. They're interested in attacking supply chains and stealing intellectual property and specifically, government secrets and things like that. So there was a breach a while back, to get the F-35 strike fighter plans, they didn't go attack the Pentagon or any DoD target. They went and attacked somebody who made gears or something way downstream, and were able to pluck those plans out of a server that was totally unguarded, right? So you see the new Biden administration mandates targeting anybody doing business with the federal government, meeting minimum standards and getting audited and those things. So it's going to be forced down upon people very quickly. But when you look at these one-to-many opportunities, look at every auto dealer in the United States. They're connected. Auto dealers are connected to the manufacturers via VPN tunnels. You heard Bob's opinion on them. We share his opinion. VPN is potentially tragic. It might actually be the worst thing that you could do in terms of securing your network, because you may just be opening up your network. And look at what happened 1 year ago in March, where everybody and their brother was concerned about building VPNs and attaching their remote users to the network. Why is it coincidental that all these other things are happening? So every business today is creating one-to-many relationships with their own users now on insecure home networks. Think about that. How many, what was it, D-Link or whatever, the flaws in these home routers are absolutely, they're all known. And my guess is most end users aren't even aware that they need to do the things like rebooting their routers or updating firmware on them.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I mean, I think everyone was kind of outraged by the SolarWinds breach, but there were several examples of providers that many of your partners may use, ConnectWise, Kaseya, Datto, anybody that has an RMM tool, right? If you're able to compromise that tool, you have a roadmap to the treasure for every one of their customers, right? And I think the only thing that's unique about SolarWinds versus what happened to a lot of smaller providers last year is that it happened to the U.S. government. And it happened through a update to the software. They actually compromised the guy who wrote the updates, for SolarWinds, and that's how they got their tool, into the update, which got them into the network of all of these government agencies. So the attack has been happening for quite some time. It was just a different variation of it that I think, raised awareness for it, because, a lot of those other attacks weren't really publicized as much as the SolarWinds breach.
That one went on for up to 2 years, they're thinking now, right? That they were lurking.
Yeah. And so the interesting thing is when we started looking at our partners who had SolarWinds that were calling us concerned about that situation, we detected any anomalous behavior out of the box. We didn't have to, do a forensics investigation for 2 weeks like FireEye. That was in the platform right away. If we saw anomalous activity on their SolarWinds server, we alerted it to them before it was even public. So that's another advantage of leveraging technology in the right way, is that you can protect yourself from these things before they become public, announcements.
That's great feedback. And moving to the last slide, to the audience, please let us know if you have any questions so we can get those answered. And we do have a couple coming in. I have a question for Mark, if you don't mind. If I have my own IT security guy, can he or she figure out OpenXDR and manage it?
That's a great question. It's absolutely possible and conceivable. Anything's within the realm of possibilities. I will say there is a tremendous learning curve. And for anybody who wants to build their own SOC 2 Type 1 or 2 SOC and implement these types of tools, the barrier to entry is high. For us, it was a 7-figure investment in data centers and tooling and processes and procedures. It's more than that annually in personnel. The challenge with having one person, I don't know when that person would sleep if they were doing it 24/7, because any security tool, XDR or otherwise, this isn't a part-time job. they generate a lot of information. And as we see the lay of the land, there's three major problems with the business problem of cybersecurity. One, there's 1,300 different tools out there, maybe 1,500, depending on what you count. They all do very narrow slices of things. Two, there's not enough people to operate them. Three, they start putting out data that's really critically important. And if you do not act upon that data, you have an affirmative responsibility to do something. You would be negligent. See problem number two, not enough people out there in the business, right? And I'll share this little nugget on that. As the CEO of a publicly traded company, when we look at our directors and officers insurance, the premiums have gone up about 100% in the last 18 to 24 months. And the number one driver of that is officer and board liability, director and officer liability related to cyber attacks, and shareholders and stakeholders suing the companies, stating that the board was negligent in their oversight and the officers didn't do enough in their oversight to prevent cybersecurity attacks. So when you look at it as a business owner, if you've got one person doing it, are you doing enough to protect your business? Are you taking the proper steps to have at least plausible deniability? It's pretty tough because cyber crimes don't go to bed at 5 o'clock. In fact, they ramp up after hours. The detections after hours, based on both the geography of where the attackers are from and the fact that it's less likely to be detected at night if you don't have a full-time security team. Very hard to accomplish with a single person.
It is. And two things like that there. I think I saw about a month ago that the U.S. now has 500,000 unfulfilled cyber analyst jobs, positions that are open, and that cybercrime is now the fourth largest GDP in the world. I do have another question coming in, actually several. We'll try to get to them the best we can, guys. We were asked, could we please recreate step by step how the process would be from detection point to response from a SOC point of view? That's a great question. I'll let Brian answer that briefly, but we're having a whole session around that coming up in the next hour around detecting breaches and responding fast. So please join there and we'll dive deep into it. We'll also have a live demo as well.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to handle that one, Jeremy. We've gone through an extensive process to make the UI as easy to understand as possible, to kind of piece these things together. But Snehal will do a very good job of providing a demo of the platform and exactly how you would detect events and things like that. I'll just add to what Mark was saying about the enablement. It is really critical to have seasoned security professionals looking at the things that you're going to see. But we do have accreditation courses available. If anybody wanted to, co-manage the platform with Highwire, it's a 3-day enablement course with 3-hour sessions that's always available. And it could just be helpful so that you'll be able to work more closely with Highwire as they're working through the different events that they're being.
Brian, that's a great point, and thank you for pointing that out. We do allow our partners to have visibility into the platform because, again, this is you plus us. When you have visibility into it, we're able to work together to make sure that we're covering the customer's needs, over and above, right? So in addition to that, we have our Overwatch University, and we'll run courses from time to time on that, where we'll have our partners get more in depth. It is really critically important for us to allow our partners to have whatever level of visibility that we want to do together, and to make sure that there's a comfort level, because this is a high trust relationship. I know we're coming to the end of the slot, Jeremy. I'd love to tackle this last question.
Okay.
So the question asked about companies offering tools with the same features. How is this different from those? And they point to one in particular, Sekion, which frankly we have a lot of familiarity with because we used Sekion at one time. I will say very simply this: in our world, it's not just about the tooling; it's about the processes and procedures and the service that we provide around it. Number one. Number two, Not all tools are equal, and many take a very different approach and have a different sales cycle to it. One of them that's out there, and I frankly believe it's a myth. I'm sorry, is that you'll need less people because we have less false positives. And as I've said earlier, we don't believe in false positives. The anomaly happened. There are only anomalies. If it needs a human being to look at it and investigate, it needs a human being to look at it and investigate. And the biggest difference that I see in Stellar, and I'm not by any means a technologist again, but what I see is when I talk to a potential partner or to a client and they want to understand why I favor something over another, I want to know how quickly I can get to the information that matters. And for those who've had the great misfortune of having to do a demo of this solution with me, it's fast and furious. It lasts about 10 minutes because that's about as deep as I can go on the technology side of it. And they don't let me touch all the cool stuff. But I can bring a customer from an alert or an incident that needs some attention. I can look at it in 5 or 6 different ways from an incredibly well-designed dashboard, and it's about to get even more exciting and better. I can look at it in 5 or 6 different ways, from a device risk to an incident risk, to a global risk score. I can look at it all these different ways, and with one click, I can get all of the information related to that and get down to the JSON logs quickly. That if I knew what they meant, I would be able to start to unravel what is going on, and I can look at what we call the blast radius very quickly and look at all the connections that particular device has had, where they're coming from, internal, external, and I can bring all that information right into view with just a single click. So when I look at time to resolution or time to decide if a SOAR action needs to be taken or a ticket needs to be generated or the client needs to be contacted, it happens fast. And to me, that gives me tremendous comfort to know that we're bringing all of the information that's stored in back right to the fore and right at the fingertips of the people who need to see it, which are the analysts. So that's a critical differentiator, and I haven't seen anything that does it better.
Really good answer there. Mark and Brian, thanks for sharing your knowledge and answering our audience's questions. Big thanks to our audience for attending. Enjoy the break, and we'll see you at the next session. Before we leave, I didn't know if Brian or Mark would like to add anything.
I'd like to thank Brian and Stellar for being great sponsors of our event, being tremendous partners. Believe it seems like forever, but I think we're going into our 3rd year working together here. We're continuing to expand the relationship, continuing to expand the footprint in our data centers and the capabilities of the tool, and couldn't be more grateful for the partnership.
Yeah, no, and I have to say it's a luxury for us to work with Highwire, because you guys are the Swiss Army knife of, partners. You guys can work with anybody, and we really appreciate the commitment to the partnership and working together to work through issues, because it's not about how great are things when things are going great, but when there's challenges that we need to work on together, we get into a room and we make it work, right? So I think that is a true luxury, and we certainly appreciate everything that the entire company does to support us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, gentlemen, and I hope to see everybody in one of our next breakout sessions, and enjoy the break.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy.